attributed to James in Acts 15 of the Christian Bible. And what he's discovered is extraordinary. The letters seem to match.
We know that James's followers in Acts took a letter down to Antioch which banned fornication, blood, strangled things, meaning carrion, and things sacrificed to idols. It reflects Qumran doctrine almost all the way through it. It's totally consistent with everything you find here in Qumran.
So if you're right, the letter found there called MMT is actually maybe penned by James.
That's the key, that letter actually contained all the things we know that James's letter contained in the book of Acts.
But this is huge. You're telling me that some of the writings that we find here are really the writings of what we would call today, or the world generally, the early church.
The early church in Palestine, not the Pauline one.
No, the actual followers of Jesus.
Yes.
Eisenman is quick to make the distinction between the followers of Jesus and another developing movement that scholars call Pauline Christianity. That's because for the Ebionites, the continuing Jesus movement led by James, the real troubles begin with a man named Paul.
Paul was the enemy of his. Paul persecuted early Christians. He didn't even know who he was. What? Paul's telling us he knows Christ better than James, better than Peter, better than people who spent their whole life with him, who followed him, who succeeded him, like the Kennedy brothers, would know more about who their brother was than people who were their enemies, who admit to having persecuted Christians in their lifetime.
Eisenman also points out that the writings uncovered here describe a spouter of lies, an enemy of the Dead Sea Scrolls community.
I planned all this too carefully to have it all blow up my face now.
According to Eisenman, the mysterious spouter of lies is none other than the Apostle Paul. After all, unlike the 12 apostles, Paul never met Jesus.
And I didn't even know him. I never saw him before in my life.
According to Acts, Paul admits that he was a brutal persecutor of the Ebionite Jesus movement until his miraculous conversion to Christianity.
So Paul is the first guy to try to drive a nail into the Ebionites, the James party, the Judeo-Christian.
He pacifies the Messianic movement, whether he did it on purpose, whether he has
an axe to grind,
a super ego.
You don't like him.
How can you like someone like that?
Eisenman's dislike of Paul stems in part from comparing the Christian Bible to an ancient document called the Clementine Recognitions.
The Clementine Recognitions, which is literature written in the name of Clement, who we know ultimately was the first or second pope in Rome after Peter.
Eisenman says there's an event described in both the Christian Bible and in Clement's writings that involves James and Paul. Only when you compare both texts do you get the full story, and it paints an ugly picture of Paul.
My new computer started out fast, really fast, but now it's only kind of fast.
Eisenman believes he has identified strong evidence that Qumran was HQ for the early Jesus movement. By comparing the Clementine Recognitions to the Christian Bible, he says he can identify a landmark that physically places James, the brother of Jesus, at Qumran. The recognitions were supposedly penned by the third pope, aptly named Clement. Clement describes a scene in which James flees from Jerusalem, seemingly to Qumran.
You have Clement going to Jerusalem, witnessing this debate on the temple steps, interrupted by this ferocious man who comes in and leads a riot of blood and beating, in which he throws James down the temple steps and leaves him for dead. James is not dead. That night, his followers, and this is recorded, pick him up, take him to a house in Jerusalem. The next day, 5,000 of them flee down to Jericho with James. The enemy, he's not named as such, he's just called the hostile, the enemy man. But in any case, he goes and gets letters from the high priests to pursue these early Christians, as they're called, all the way to Damascus.
Although the Clementine text does not name the hostile enemy, his actions exactly match those of the Apostle Paul, as described in the New Testament. In Acts 9, Paul chases the early Christians down the road to Damascus. But before he can catch them, he has a vision of the resurrected Jesus. It's an experience so powerful that Paul stops his chase and enlists with Christ. The story in Acts exactly matches the tale in the Clementine writings. And so Eisenman says that the unnamed enemy must be Paul.
Paul is chasing the James community.
Right, after the riot in the temple. Paul pursues James on his way to Damascus, comes through Jericho, but he misses them.
Where did they go? Where did they
I'm
go?
going to tell you where they went.
By matching the recognitions to the Christian Bible, Eisenman has uncovered the